us tonight, Google's Clay Bavor.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
So Daydream is, and we're going to talk about this, more than just this headset that you guys shipped today, but just in case people haven't had a chance, if you didn't get to try it on, what did you guys do and how is it a little bit different than what was out there before today?
Yeah. First of all, thank you so much for having me. Hey, everyone. It's great to be here. So with Daydream, when we looked out at what was happening in VR, we saw VR happening on desktop computers. There's a lot of complexity there still, wires, cables, lots of stuff to set up. And then in fairly narrow places on one set of phones on mobile devices. And what we learned with Cardboard was there was something pretty special when you could take this small additional device. In our case, it started literally with a piece of cardboard and some lenses, and there was also technically a rubber band in the device, and kind of unlock this VR capability in a phone. But the way Cardboard did it is kind of tricked a phone that wasn't fundamentally meant for VR into acting as a VR device. And so what we did with Daydream was a lot of the heavy lifting and the hard work in all levels of the Android operating system, in hardware reference designs and specs, and then in the SDKs and APIs that people need to really bring up a mobile VR ecosystem to help hardware manufacturers build phones that work great for VR, to help them build headsets that are comfortable and performant, and also across the Android ecosystem, providing some standards for how to build apps, quality bars to make sure that users are comfortable. And one of the things we're most proud of with Daydream View, the headset and controller, which went on sale today, is the controller itself. It's a standard way that developers can, that users can use to interact with their worlds around them. And it's very flexible. It can turn into a magic wand and
so it's like a Wii controller with a touchpad and a couple buttons.
It is the best summary of the controller I've heard. It's exactly that, yeah. And it's pretty neat with, you're in VR, but as soon as you're in VR, like you want to do stuff, right? It's like, wow, I'm somewhere else. This is cool. Okay, now what? And with the controller, this very simple, lightweight, easy to use thing, you can pick it up and it can turn it into a laser pointer. It can select things. It can turn into a magic wand. You can use it to navigate around. We've had more creative uses of it as well, including using it to flip virtual pancakes. And some other exciting
I think I was
things.
throwing in the introduction, they have this great tutorial when you first try it on. And one of the things they have you do is try and play fetch with a dog. It took me a little time to figure out. And they have this great tutorial when you first try it on. And one of the things they have you do is try and play fetch with a dog. It took me a little time to figure it out.
It's technically an Arctic fox, not a dog.
Dog was trademarked by somebody.
Technically an Arctic fox, not a dog.
Dog was trademarked by somebody.
Arctic fox.
Okay.
But I appreciate that you noticed that. We're very proud of the throwing gesture.
And then, just to set the stage, so one of the things,
Arctic fox.
Okay.
But I appreciate that you noticed that. We're very proud of the throwing gesture.
And then, just to set the stage, one of the things, Daydream View, you might think, oh, that kind of looks like Gear VR, but there's a bunch of things that are different. The controller's one big difference. Daydream View, you might think, oh, that kind of looks like Gear VR, but there's a bunch of things that are different. The controller's one big difference. Yeah. The other thing, it's actually made from Clay's shirt. So the shirt that he's wearing, he used to have a few million of them. All but this one have been cut up. The other thing, it's actually made from Clay's shirt. So the shirt that he's wearing, he used to have a few million of them. All but this one have been cut up and made into headsets. Why did you give up your wardrobe so that people could have these soft and made into headsets? Why did you give up?
First of all, it's personally very expensive and a big sacrifice for me. No, I wore this in celebration of the launch. I found a shirt that's made out of essentially the same material as the headset. So when we looked out there at VR headsets, just to say it, we love what's happening in this space. We think everyone's doing something useful and important, and Gear VR in many ways was a trailblazer, and I was talking with folks at Oculus, and massive respect there. What we saw was, though, that some things were pretty complicated, right? Like kind of lots of things to get just right to get into a mobile VR experience. We thought control could be a bit better instead of kind of looking and tapping where you want to go, give you a bit more richness of expression. And then finally, VR, it's exciting, but also to many people, it's not that approachable, right? You look at it and it looks, the devices look a bit intimidating. It's something you put on. And so we thought, you wear a VR headset. What if instead of approaching the design of it like you would a consumer electronics gizmo, we looked at it more like a piece of clothing, something that you wear. And that led us down this path of, what if we used materials like microfiber and fabric and breathable cloth and actually crafted it, constructed it like something you'd wear. And the result is something we're super proud of, something that looks at home on a coffee table and is most importantly super comfortable and easy and approachable to wear.
So where we are today is there's the Daydream View headset. There's one phone that works with it today, or two coming.
Yep, the Pixel phones.
The Pixel phones from Google.
Great
and then
phones.
Huawei announced a phone that's going to be the first non-Google Daydream ready phone.
The Mate 9 Pro, so Huawei just announced that, and it'll be kind of Daydreamified over a software update soon.
And you guys are working with a bunch of other companies, right?
Well, there's Samsung, Huawei, ZTE, LG, Asus, Lenovo, really most of the major smartphone OEMs across the Android ecosystem. And there's just been tremendous interest in it because, number one, we've done a lot of the heavy lifting to enable great mobile VR experiences. And not just on one phone, but across many, many.
So is the goal that Android in smartphones is the dominant operating system. I think I saw 86 or some percent globally of smartphones run Android. Is the goal that mobile VR, Android and Daydream is the center of experience for the vast majority of mobile phones as well?
Well, our hope with Daydream is in ways similar to Android, which created this broad, open ecosystem for hardware manufacturers, for developers to experiment and try new things in smartphones. We do the same with Daydream for VR. And we do that by creating standards for quality, standards for developers, help with some of kind of the plumbing of performant VR experiences, and then just bring up this ecosystem, all sides, right? Users, content, developers, phones, to really get this to scale. Because I think the magic starts to happen in VR when there are enough users, when there are enough devices, and most importantly, enough things to do. You spoke about
and
this
there's
in your
really
intro.
not today, not even Gear VR, which has been on the market for a while. A lot of people don't find enough. There's even less, it went on sale today. There's a few.
We're on day zero, right?
A few games, a few VR experiences, all of YouTube. You can watch a bunch of video, but in terms of actual experiences built for it, it's pretty small. The number of headsets, obviously, you're starting from zero. Samsung's been out there for a while. Is there a big chicken and egg problem, or is this something that just solves itself pretty easily?
Yeah. There's obviously some chicken and egg problem here. I guess I'm not familiar enough with the taxonomy of different scales of chickens and eggs, but I think in order to motivate developers to make good stuff, and good stuff, by the way, costs money to make, you need users to sell that stuff to, so that they can build a business and maintain their development cycles. Similarly, in order for a lot of people to buy into a VR headset, there's got to be neat stuff to do. There's got to be value in the experience. And so I think you need to solve both those sides. With Daydream, we've focused on knowing that for the next several years, content's still going to be ramping up. How do we unlock the kind of VR power in your phone for not a lot of money? How do we do something that's affordable, that's approachable?
And your vision is basically that next year's premium phones, many of them will just be Daydream ready. So if you never use it for VR, it's just the premium phone that you were going to buy, but then
with the Daydream View for $79, right, you can kind of unlock this VR superpower in your phone. And I think for a lot of people, that'll make a lot of sense, right? There's a lot of goodness there already with YouTube, with Street View, we've taken the entire Google Cultural Institute, many works in the Google Cultural Institute, where we've scanned photos and paintings and works of art in very high resolution. And you can go into VR and look at a Monet or a Van Gogh as if you're there in person, right? And by the way, you can actually have a better experience because there aren't so many crowds. And we'll get back to that in a second. And you can zoom in, right, all the way up and see individual breaststrokes. So I think for a lot of people that'll make sense. But yes, next year, I'll just say I think CES and Mobile World Congress will be very exciting for VR.
And I want to talk about how we get from where we are to where this future. What is VR good at today, and what is still not a good experience? What are the things, and games is sort of obvious, so let's leave gaming aside.
Yeah.
What besides gaming is VR really good at today?
Yeah. One of the things so first of all, I think it's important not to just put gaming aside, because I think first, games are going to be incredibly important. And I think games as a single label for what's being developed in VR a bit oversimplifies it. I think many of today's greatest games are themselves kind of different worlds, right, that you can explore, that you can engage in, that you can talk to other people in. Is that a game, or is that like an interactive experience?
Pardon me. It was nothing you said.
Thank you so much. I would offer my T-shirt.
But antihistamines. Just send it on up.
So I think it's important not to just kind of part gaming, and I think the reality is everyone's still finding their way in what forms of games, of interactive entertainment really work in VR, what really take advantage of it, and what works well within the limitations of VR today. Right? That most people, if you're lucky, you have a 10 by 10, empty space in your house where you can walk around a little bit, but it's not like you can, walk through open worlds. So I do think games are important. We've been very focused on Daydream and with mobile VR on, I think, what you can kind of wrap up as VR video. What do I mean by that? First of all, like the real world has been strange this week, but in general, the real world is an amazing place, and there are all of these incredible things and places happening that I'd love to see, and I think most people would love to see. And
so this is, broadly speaking, virtual tourism. It's taking me to places. You can walk on Mars, which other than Elon Musk, most of us aren't going to probably get to do.
Although, if you believe him, many of us, for only $100,000, in 2040.
Daydream View's got a good price.
I think we have very strong price advantage relative to that. I think it's, I'd put it this way. Everyone has something in the real world that they'd like to be closer to. That could be a beautiful faraway place that they've always imagined traveling to, Machu Picchu. That could be a sports team they care about. And gosh, I mean, there are a lot of people, I'm thinking, last in the NBA championship, a lot of people would have loved to sat courtside and watch that game up close. But there are only like 400 courtside seats, right? So basically 0% of the world gets to do things like that. And
I'd like to also change the ending of that.
That's right, exactly, right? My wife and I, my wife is a high school history teacher. We were in New York for a week, and we went to the end of the earth to get Hamilton tickets to see the original cast. And we're among this incredibly privileged few who get to see something like that. And I love the idea of VR and VR video capture systems kind of capturing this value being radiated by performances and sports teams in beautiful places and making it accessible to vastly more people than would otherwise be possible. And I think that's already interesting today. You can see that in simple pieces. One of my favorites on Daydream right now takes you to the London Museum of Natural History. It puts you there, and it's like you're there. And you then get to see a Ramaliosaurus, very scary. I was told by a paleontologist it's not technically a dinosaur, but what I'm going to call a dinosaur, come alive in this museum, and it's kind of this fantastic experience. There are more basic things, right, where you can go and see a hockey game, right up front, like from the ice.
So let's talk about sports for a second.
I think that's going to be important and interesting, and I think a good version of that is doable today, and I think a great version of that will be doable in the near future.
Because I think sports is interesting. One, I'm a huge sports nut. But two, it's an example of what really works well today in VR and what really doesn't.
Yeah.
So
you see both sides of it, depending on what sport.
So like, some of these sports, football is kind of my perennial, football or soccer, of, it's actually not a very good experience in VR. And part of the reason it's not a good experience in VR is it's not a great experience live.
Correct.
It's a great experience.
Just to
on
be
television.
clear, great game, but
Love
football
both.
field, soccer field's very big, right?
The
And
fans make it fun,
Yeah.
but
hot dogs, cotton candy. Bud Light.
the best seats at a football game aren't
Yeah.
right in one place. And really the best seat for most people is in front of your TV. What could VR do to make that a better experience, or should they be concentrating on just different sports to begin with?
So it's a very astute observation that kind of depending on the scale and size of the sport, VR where you're there, but you're there in one place and maybe far from where the action is happening on the other side is not that interesting. And I think football is a good example of that. I think a couple things I'd say. First of all, I believe there will be ways to bridge that gap using clever techniques involving interactivity and kind of overlays, right? So you can imagine feeling like you're there at a football game, but having periodic overlays of replays that show close-ups, almost like kind of virtual screens in the VR experience. So it's almost like an overlay on a VR experience, and I think that has potential to bridge the gap. The other is, as VR cameras today are few and relatively expensive. With Jump, VR video capture system we've been working on, we're trying to bring the cost of that capture down. But they're few and far between, which means you're only going to have one or two at one of these events. But imagine if you had them all over the field and you can kind of go to where the action is, or kind of have the VR director bring you to where the action is. So I think that's interesting. The other thing is just rooted in the sport itself, right? Where basketball is an amazing sport to watch up close, where you can see the micro gestures and how the players use their eyes and so on, and it's and the court is small enough where you can really appreciate everything the players are doing and see everything. And so I think it may be an issue of just actually kind of selecting the sports and the events where it really is best to be there in person, live. And I think this isn't sports, but I think theater is a good example of that. Like Shakespeare wrote Shakespeare plays to be performed in theaters, and you were meant to see them right either in the round or on a stage in front of you. And so I'm excited about VR's potential for letting art forms, making art forms much more accessible, but in a way that is true to the original art.
Concerts are another one. Live Nation has a big deal with NextVR.
Yeah.
The other area that's, I think, really interesting and all the more timely this week is VR can not just take you to places, but it can literally put you in someone else's shoes. And I've been thinking a lot this week in particular about the need to understand other people's experiences. Yep. And the ability of VR to do that in a way that even a well-shot documentary doesn't. I remember I was at TED a couple years ago and they were showing Chris Milk's film, Clouds Over Sidra, which is a VR film shot in a Syrian refugee camp.
Wonderful piece.
And you feel the confines.
You're there in the tent with her,
yeah.
right? You're there and watching her family cook food, right, on this tiny stove.
And in a documentary, you could see that, but you couldn't feel trapped. You couldn't feel like you were playing soccer, but there was a barbed wire fence.
Yep.
Do you think VR will make us more empathetic, or VR seems like a lot of technology to have both possibilities. It could bring us closer and allow us to put ourselves in other people's shoes, or everyone's in their own world, literally.
Yeah.
They've got a headset. If you and I were in VR instead of sitting here and everyone here were experiencing this VR, we wouldn't be present in the same way. How do you think about that? How do you think about the very strange dynamic of this device can bring two physically distant people closer, or two very close people more distant?
Nuanced, great question. Look, I am among the most enthusiastic, optimistic, excited people about VR, on the planet, and I think in time it will transform everything we talked about: travel, how we experience art, things of beauty, how we record our memories, right? Stepping back into moments in time that matter to us, and I think it'll be pretty profound. But even with that, I think it's important to not overstate, right, VR's ability to transform health, or I've heard it called the empathy machine, and so I don't think it's any panacea. I think it, and to state the obvious, far more complicated than letting someone step into someone's shoes. But I think in that it is and will be a powerful tool in doing that. And you talked about the experience of feeling you feel confined in the tent, right, in Clouds Over Sidra. Oh my goodness, like this is the living space, huh? And you kind of your brain understands something, connects to something in a way that it otherwise wouldn't if you're kind of viewing it through a window or something. And you can see that what would it be like to be on one side or the other of a police confrontation, right? And I think that's important. I don't think it's the solution. I think it's a tool, and it's a tool that I'm excited to bring to the world. But I'm not naive about it solving anything on its own. On the connecting with people far away, but perhaps distancing you from people you're with, I'm actually very optimistic with that. It's easy to see the case for bringing two people who are far apart together. It'll start with two people kind of represented more abstractly as kind of characters or avatars doing something or playing something or watching something together. And there's really something about hearing a familiar voice, hearing a voice of someone you care about next to you, and just having a sense that they're there with you, even if they're not a photorealistic replica.
And that happens, you think, next year, where people are able to not necessarily feel like they're in the same room with the representation of the person, but grandma and grandkid can play together and hear each other's voice.
I think the reality is more likely in 2017 it's friend and friend who both happen to have VR headsets. I think grandma's maybe 2018. But yeah, exactly. And I think in time you'll have, and by this I mean many years out, right, experiences where you and I could talk from the other side of the world in a way that is, convincingly real. And that's something that I think for anyone with family or friends or people they care about somewhere else, I think could be profound for the world. So I think there's an easy case to be made for that, and I think we see a path there. On the going places, kind of if we're all in VR together, are we separate? I think one of the earliest insights we had, which came out in a program we call Expeditions. It's basically virtual field trips. And it's a tool we've made available to schools around the world. We've taken 1 million students on these, which is a bunch of cardboards and a teacher tablet, and a class can go visit the Galapagos Islands or Verona, Italy, all together. So everyone's in VR, but they're somewhere else together. So they're the same physical space, and they're using VR as kind of a portal to another space, but they're there together. You can hear what each other is saying, what everyone is saying. And there's a wonderful sense of, the same experience you have seeing a new place with a friend or a family member or a group, where you're taking it in together. The wows happen together. And I think the next step in that is not only hearing and knowing that you're there with other people, but actually having some indication in that other place that there are the people there.
And you're only hearing them because you're actually in the same classroom.
That's right.
So down the road, you would hear them because you'd have headsets.
Sure, yeah. And you'll have, today we have this very crude version of kind of co-presence in Expeditions where you can see what everyone else is looking at. Like, oh, interesting, everyone's looking at the shark. Let me check out this shark. In time, you'll actually have the feeling that you're there with your classmates or your friends or your family members. And I think that's neat, this idea of like, hey, do you want to go to a concert tonight? Great. And then we can go somewhere that we otherwise might not have access to or be expensive or time-consuming or whatever to get to, and go see something together, and come back and oh my God, did you see the part where this happened? That was so cool. And I think that shared experience, the shared nature of the experience is kind of the core of what I think will make for a good kind of social VR experience.
So I want to return in a couple minutes we have left to the mobile versus desktop, sort of how this comes to be. Today you have two pretty different experiences. You have this desktop Oculus and HTC Vive where you have a big commitment. It's expensive. It takes up a lot of space. You're tethered to a PC. You need a lot of physical space, but you have this.
But it's visually amazing.
Yeah.
It's great.
and mobile started out as cardboard, so really limited. It's evolved a little to Daydream and Gear VR. How does that grow, and is there a space? Well, I know you guys have considered the space. Do you think we'll see products from you guys and others in that middle space that's mobile, but you're not relying on the phone, you don't have its limitations, so it's sort of a dedicated mobile headset? Is that a part of Daydream?
Yeah. I mean, first of all, there have been rumors about us building every possible device. And some of those rumors are true, and most of those rumors are not true. So I can't really comment too much about that. But what I would say is I think these different form factors and compute levels and so on are there for a reason, which is different people are going to have different needs, levels of interest. They'll value different types of experiences differently. And if you're into games, if you're a real PC gamer, like, you should buy a Rift or a Vive. They're great. They're terrific. And it's a bigger commitment, but as someone who loves games, right, you get the kind of return back on your investment, and it's worthwhile. And so, my own feeling, our feeling at Google and within Daydream is, that's great. By the way, I have a Rift, I have a Vive, I have a PlayStation VR, right? They're all great. That in the near term, the content, the mass market content is going to be there's more video type content, and you need a device that can unlock access to these kind of interactive VR video experiences that's low cost, that makes sense for tens of millions of people instead of millions of people to plonk down. They get that value back from. And
do you see there being room today for a device in the middle?
I see room for devices I think there's room even beyond desktop PC, which we're seeing with places like the Void, right, where you have full installations, basically amusement parks, dedicated PCs, special hardware, and so on.
And that was going to be my last question.
Yeah.
Is, do you see VR as something that people try out in places? Because we wrote about this with, we've seen Samsung's Gear VR attached to roller coasters at Six Flags.
Yeah.
There's things like the Void. IMAX is doing
I'm very prone to motion sickness, and that video made me very nervous.
Do you think VR is going to be something that people own, or they try out? How are people going to get into VR?
Yeah. I think the vast majority of people will be introduced to VR through one of these mobile VR devices, a Gear VR or a Daydream, because that's what people are going to have. And I can take it to a friend's house. Hey, check it out. This is cool. Oh, cool. Okay. Do I think there's room in between mobile VR, smartphone-powered VR and desktop VR? Absolutely. I think there's probably more than one device in between there, right? Depending on what trade-offs you're trying to make, right? And so I think you're going to have people introduced via smartphone-based VR, and they're going to go up from there, right? All the way to, hey, have you heard about that Void thing? There's an awesome Ghostbusters experience. Let's check it out. And again, I think different folks are going to value and want to do different things, and they'll find the right place, right, on that spectrum for them. We're playing in one because that's where we believe kind of this all starts.
And do you guys feel you need to be in all the places you are long term, like making headsets, making phones that go in headsets, and then the experience? Are all three of those equally important to you, or would you be just as happy if you weren't in the headset business?
The fundamental goal of Daydream has been to enable partners and developers to build great stuff, right? And so the headset we're launching today, we use it as, hey, here's an example. Here's a take on how to do this. And by the way, here's a controller architecture that works. And we're handing the reference designs for that to partners. Our goal is to enable partners to build this stuff and to experiment themselves, right? Because we're in such early days with VR. Like 99.9% of things in VR have yet to be discovered. We want to help people discover those things. That is the goal of Daydream, and at the core of that is kind of the core software, the standards, the specs, the kind of connective tissue between developers, users, manufacturers. That's our focus. And today's announcement, a tool, right? A product we're very proud of, but a tool in bringing that to life.
And we'll see other headsets next year, other phones. Great. Well, we have time for at least one question, maybe two. Stephen, I think someone's going to bring you a mic.
I was curious, with the mobile phone headsets, it can be kind of a crummy experience sometimes. There are a lot of pixels, the lenses aren't great, it's cheap and accessible, but are you worried that people will try VR and will be put off by it just because it's just not that compelling, not compelling enough, and it'll fizzle? The developers will decide, well, maybe it's not really worth producing content unless you're up at this expensive high-end and Oculus kind of level. Are you worried that the lower-end products just won't be compelling enough to convince people to commit to it?
No, because we've seen so many people pick up one of these devices and have these moments like, oh my God, I was there. And I think what's exciting to see that the technology curves have kind of crossed. You have enough mobile GPU horsepower, you have enough display resolution, you have sensors that are accurate enough that you can do really good head tracking and build controllers and so on. And so I'm really proud of what we've built. I think Gear VR sets a great standard where you get a taste of VR. I think we've all focused very heavily on latency, performance, frame rate, and so on to make sure that first experience is comfortable. And I think if it's the difference between exposing someone to VR where you can look around but maybe not move all around, or not exposing them to VR at all, I'd much rather have the former. And I think, of course, in time, these devices, screens get better, tracking gets better. You have more and more of the performance characteristics of the higher-end devices in more and more accessible and less expensive devices. And that'll happen in time. But I think as first toe to dip in the water for VR, these are great products.
I think there was another question in the back, maybe more than one. I see a couple of hands, actually. I can't really see where, so whoever gets the mic first.
My question is that do you ever see the Daydream platform extending into AR? I know you have an investment in Magic Leap, but or is this something which is very specific to VR and will remain there?
Yeah, we didn't get to AR, but you guys are doing a bunch of
Yeah, that thing. Augmented reality. I hear that's a thing. So first of all, Magic Leap, it's an investment. They're a private company separate from Google. We love what they're doing. We're excited about it, but it's a separate company. And I don't really know what they're doing, and if I did, I couldn't really talk about it. So part of my team is actually a group called the Tango team. They built this technology called Tango, and it uses a technique that is called visual inertial odometry, basically looking out into the environment and fusing the way the camera observes the environment moving with IMUs and accelerometers, and that gives a device a very accurate perception of kind of where it is in space. And you can use that to do some pretty neat things. So one of my favorite examples is Wayfair. They're I believe, the largest or one of the largest online furniture retailers. You can actually kind of look through this almost like magic window of your smartphone into an environment and see if the chair is going to fit there, or the couch will fit over there, and overlay virtual objects into the real world, take videos and photos of them, and so on. So I think the technology's there, and we're certainly thinking about what are the right applications for it. Does that or anything else merge with Daydream? I don't know. But it's something we're looking at, something we're excited about, and the technology's certainly there.
And is Glass, does that make a comeback because of AR, and is that in your world?
I think Glass was interesting in that it trailblazed in a lot of ways. First, getting people thinking about kind of wearable computing. In my mind, Glass, I think of it more as kind of an in-lens like smartwatch, right? Like a notifications tray than augmented reality. For me, augmented reality implies knowledge and perception about the surroundings and the ability to kind of anchor things within that world. And Glass didn't really do that. I think we in the world certainly learned a lot from it. And I think a lot of those learnings live on in what we're doing. I can't say there's any plan to merge or resuscitate or whatever, revive, remix Glass with anything that we're doing.
Okay. Well, I think there's one more question really quick because we're out of time. In the back. And then we'll have more time. The great part is we have more time afterwards to
So we always had VR. We just used to call it schizophrenia. Which is a flippant way to ask the questions. When is this intensity of this experience going to cause mental health problems? And when is the point where Do Not Evil is going to kick in?
That's a very exciting last question. Thank you for that, sir. I think in VR, we're at the very beginning of figuring out how content works. We're still learning how to build the hardware and what's going to work there. To your point, we're figuring out what makes a compelling experience, how do we connect people in it, and so on. I think in everything, it's the early days. I think what we're doing on my team is keeping a really close eye on the way people are using it, making sure that it's comfortable, making sure that we're doing everything we can to make it safe and age appropriate and so on. And part of that is, we've put some pretty clear bars and guidelines as part of the Play Store review process. Make sure that the things that are going on to the Play Store are things we're comfortable with.
So no VR porn, or VR porn is okay?
I would refer you to the regulations and rules of the Play Store, and that's not kosher on the Play Store. I think that we don't know all the answers, but I think we're aware of, hey, this technology can put you somewhere else, right? It can make you feel like you're somewhere else. It's a great responsibility to get everything right around that, and we feel that responsibility and we think about it a lot. So anyway, thank you for that question, sir.
Cool. Well, Clay, I could talk with you for hours.
Hey, me too. Yeah, we should hang out.
Yeah,
this
we
is cool.
should totally do that in the real world. IRL, as I think the kids
No,
call it.
that's good. That's good. RR. All right.
Awesome.
Thank
Well,
you so much for having me. I really